He thought she was safe until a hidden camera showed his 5-year-old daughter scrubbing floors like a servant, too terrified to cry. Nathan Carter hadn't opened that email out of curiosity, it had been instinct. The kind that claws at your ribs when something is wrong and you don't know why. The message had no subject line, only a video attachment and a single sentence. You need to see what your daughter is living through. For a moment, he couldn't remember how to breathe. Then he pressed play. The footage was grainy, clearly taken from a phone tucked behind something, perhaps a cupboard or chair. But the image was unmistakable. A small girl, no older than 5, on her knees in a tiled kitchen, silently scrubbing the floor with a rag half her size. Her dark curls clung to her face, soaked, and her thin arms trembled with each motion. No sound, no resistance, just quiet obedience. And then she turned slightly toward the camera, and Nathan saw her face. His chest caved. Ellie. The daughter he had walked away from 5 years ago. Without a word, he grabbed his coat, car keys, and nothing else. By nightfall, he was on the road back to Maple Hollow, back to the child he should never have left. Nathan Carter was in the middle of a quarterly board meeting when his phone buzzed twice, silent, deliberate. He normally ignored personal notifications during work, especially in the sterile glass tower that bore his name. But something about the rhythm of the buzz, the way it seemed to echo through his ribcage rather than his pocket, made him glance at the screen. The message had no contact name, no subject, just a single line. You need to see what your daughter is living through. For a second, his vision blurred. He hadn't heard that word daughter directed at him in 5 years. His hand, suddenly clammy, moved on instinct, tapping the attachment. The video opened with shaky, grainy footage. A dimly lit kitchen, old linoleum tiles. The camera seemed hidden, angled from behind a chair or cabinet. In the center of the screen, a child was on her knees, scrubbing the floor with slow, practiced strokes. Her small hands gripped a gray rag. Her shoulders were hunched. No sound, no crying, no complaining, just movement, mechanical and subdued, like she knew exactly how long she was expected to keep going. The room was silent, but the silence was louder than screaming. Nathan leaned forward. The girl's hair was dark and wet, clinging to her cheeks. Her arms were too thin. She shifted slightly, and that's when it hit him like a blow to the gut. The face, the eyes, the outline of her lips so unmistakably familiar it made his throat close. Ellie, his daughter, the one he had walked away from when she was just a baby, under pressure from board members, media threats, and his own cowardice. He had signed the paper, left a check, and convinced himself she would be okay, that someone else would love her better. But here she was scrubbing a floor in silence, like she'd been trained never to speak. He stood so suddenly that his chair toppled backward with a crash, silencing the room. Meeting adjourned, he muttered, already halfway out the door, ignoring the startled stares from shareholders and executives. In his car, hands trembling on the wheel. Nathan didn't punch in a destination. He didn't need GPS to find Maple Hollow. It was burned into his conscience. As he sped onto the highway, one thought drowned out the rest. She was never supposed to look like that. And I was never supposed to leave. Nathan didn't remember taking the elevator down. His body moved, but his mind was splintered into shards of guilt, panic, and disbelief. By the time he stepped into the underground parking garage, he wasn't the CEO of Carter Dynamics anymore. He was just a man who had failed the one person who never got a choice. He slammed the car door shut, the sound reverberating through the concrete chamber like a gavel of judgment. His hands shook as he started the engine. He didn't think to grab a bag, didn't notify his assistant, didn't cancel his appointments, didn't even check the stock report that was supposed to make or break their new product launch. None of that mattered now. Nothing did except the image of that small girl on her knees, eyes too hollow for someone so young. The highway signs blurred past him as he sped north, the city skyline dissolving in the rearview mirror like a chapter being erased. He didn't turn on music. He didn't make a single call. He just drove. Headlights carving through early dusk like a blade slicing into memory. Maple Hollow was nearly 4 hours away, tucked in a forgotten fold of Kentucky farmland. A town so small it didn't show up properly on the corporate maps. He had left it behind like a bad dream. Ellie, her mother, the shame of a mistake that didn't fit the branding of his rising empire. He had convinced himself it was mercy, but now, every mile he drove peeled back another lie he had fed himself. He remembered her birth the way she had curled into his chest like she belonged there. He remembered how scared he'd been when the press found out, when board members threatened to pull funding if his scandal became public. He remembered how cold his signature looked on the custody waiver. Now all he saw was her on that linoleum floor. How many nights had she done that? How many birthdays had passed without a gift, a hug, or a voice telling her she mattered? Nathan gripped the steering wheel tighter as the first street signs for Maple Hollow appeared under the moonlight. He didn't know what he'd find. He only knew one thing for sure: he wasn't leaving without her. Not this time. Rosa Delgado stood at the kitchen sink with her hands submerged in cold, greasy water, but her mind was far from the dishes. She had just done something she couldn't undo. And now every creak of the floorboards upstairs made her heart seize. For nearly 2 years, she had kept her head down, folded the laundry, scrubbed the floors, and told herself that helping Ellie quietly, gently, without confrontation was enough. She had brought extra snacks in her bag, tucked little notes with drawings under Ellie's pillow, taught her how to braid her hair when Vanessa wasn't looking. But none of that stopped what she saw happen when Brandon came home. Rosa had heard the shouts, the cruel commands, the threats disguised as discipline. She had seen the marks that didn't look like accidents, and most of all, she had watched Ellie disappear inside herself more and more each week, until the girl barely blinked when spoken to. Last night, when Rosa saw Ellie scrubbing the kitchen floor barefoot at nearly 10 o'clock, her tiny knees red and raw, something snapped. She propped her phone between a canister of flour and a napkin holder and hit record. She didn't know who would watch it. She only knew someone had to. The next morning, Rosa waited until Vanessa left for her weekly nail appointment, and Brandon was off to his late shift. She slipped into the back bathroom, locked the door, and opened her old email account, the one she hadn't used since her teenage son was arrested 6 years ago, back when she still believed the system might listen if she screamed loud enough. She typed only one sentence and attached the video. She had no idea if Nathan Carter would see it, care, or even remember his daughter's name. But she hit send anyway, her hands trembling, heart pounding like a drumbeat of betrayal and hope colliding. Now, standing in the quiet kitchen once more, Rosa dried her hands and glanced at the doorway. She heard Ellie's soft footsteps coming down the hall. The girl peeked around the corner, eyes wary, clutching her little notepad. Rosa smiled gently, the kind of smile that asked nothing, demanded nothing, just reminded the child she wasn't invisible. In her mind, she whispered a prayer she hadn't dared voice in years. Please, let him come back for her before it's too late. Nathan parked 2 blocks away from the elementary school, far enough to go unnoticed, but close enough to watch through the gaps in the fence. He hadn't slept. After arriving in Maple Hollow just before dawn, he'd driven past the house where Ellie lived if that cold, silent structure could even be called a home, and then wandered the empty streets until the schoolyard bell rang. Now he stood hidden behind a cluster of low trees, the branches brushing against his coat as he scanned the playground with eyes sharper than they'd ever been in any boardroom. And then he saw her. Ellie. Small, thin, and impossibly still in the middle of a world full of noise. Children ran, shouted, chased balls and laughter across the gravel. But Ellie sat alone on the edge of a low concrete step, her knees pulled tight to her chest. Her hair was longer than he remembered, tied back in a makeshift ponytail that was already coming loose. Her shoes were scuffed, one lace dragging in the dust, and in her right hand, gripped like a lifeline, was a stub of a pencil chewed on, dulled down, the eraser worn to the metal ring. She wasn't writing. She wasn't drawing. She was simply holding it, like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. Nathan watched her fingers tighten around it every time a group of kids ran by too close. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't call out, just stayed still, head slightly bowed, eyes tracking movement without ever making contact. Not one adult approached her. Not one child called her name. She might as well have been invisible. Nathan's throat tightened. This wasn't shyness. This wasn't a phase. This was silence crafted over years, built layer by layer like armor, each brick laid by neglect, fear, and absence most of all, his own. He realized then that he didn't know the sound of her voice, didn't know what made her laugh or what color she liked or what she dreamed about when no one was watching. All he knew was that once, long ago, she had belonged to him, and he had walked away. Now, he couldn't move, couldn't blink, could only watch his daughter clutch a broken pencil like it was a shield against a world that had never protected her. Nathan waited until recess ended before walking slowly, deliberately, toward the front office. He hadn't planned what he would say, just that he needed to know more. Anything. The woman at the front desk, a kind-faced receptionist named Janice, offered a polite smile when he introduced himself as a distant relative doing a wellness check. She didn't question it. Small towns didn't run on suspicion. They ran on politeness and silence. Within minutes, he was sitting across from Ellie's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Hawthorne, in a small, overheated office that smelled faintly of copier ink and old coffee. She was in her early 50s, with tired eyes and a cardigan draped loosely over her shoulders. Ellie's complicated. She began gently, as if trying not to break something delicate between them. She's never disruptive, never raises her voice. Actually, I don't think I've heard her say more than 5 words all year. Nathan's heart contracted. Is she mute? He asked, voice low. Mrs. Hawthorne shook her head. No, not clinically. I've had her evaluated. She understands everything, follows every instruction, completes every assignment with perfect accuracy, but she speaks only when absolutely necessary. Short, clipped answers. And sometimes not even then. It's like she doesn't believe she's allowed to take up space. Nathan looked away, his jaw tightening. Does she have friends, Mrs. Hawthorne paused, choosing her words with painful care. The other children aren't unkind, but they don't know how to include someone who doesn't respond. And Ellie doesn't try. At lunch, she picks at her food, or doesn't eat at all. We've sent notes home, asked if she has allergies or preferences, but never received a response. Nathan swallowed hard. Has anyone followed up with the mother? The home situation. Her expression shifted. a flicker of frustration breaking through her practiced calm. We've tried. But the stepfather insists everything's fine. And frankly, they don't give us much access. The mother is elusive. Nathan stared at the wall behind her, unable to meet her eyes. Every word was a blade, carving into the space where a father should have been. Mrs. Hawthorne sighed. She's brilliant. You know. Quiet as she is, her mind is always working. But she looks tired. Too tired for a child. And no child should look that way. Nathan nodded once, tightly. He had all the confirmation he needed. Ellie wasn't just neglected. She was vanishing, quietly, completely, and he had to bring her back. The house looked smaller than Nathan remembered. Paint peeling, porch sagging, windows fogged with grime. It had once been a place he'd sent money to out of guilt, imagining it might become a home. Now it looked like a warning. He parked across the street and walked slowly up the cracked pathway, rehearsing nothing, preparing for everything. When the door opened, Vanessa stood in the threshold like a ghost conjured from another life. Her eyes widened at first, a flash of recognition and panic bleeding through the heavy eyeliner and tight jaw. She didn't speak, just stared. "Vanessa," Nathan said, voice calm, too calm, masking the thunder in his chest. "I need to see Ellie." Her lips parted, then closed again. She stepped outside and shut the door behind her, arms folded tightly over her chest like a barricade. "What are you doing here?" she asked, tone sharp, but not strong. There was something brittle underneath it, like her control was cracking just beneath the surface. "I got a video," he said plainly. "I saw her." Vanessa flinched, just slightly, but enough. She didn't ask what video. She knew. "You gave up your rights, Nathan," she snapped. "You signed the papers. You don't get to show up 5 years later and pretend you're some kind of hero." "I'm not pretending," he said, stepping closer. "I'm watching a child clean floors in silence like she's afraid to breathe. And I'm telling you it ends now." Her eyes flicked to the door behind her, then back to him. And that's when Nathan felt the change in the air. The door creaked open, and Brandon stepped out, broad shoulders, stained t-shirt, a beer can still gripped in his hand. His eyes locked on Nathan like a wolf spotting another male on his territory. "Problem here?" he asked, voice slow and thick with threat. Nathan met his gaze, unflinching. "I came to talk about Ellie." Brandon's lip curled. "You don't get to talk about her. She's not your problem anymore." For a long second, no one moved. Nathan's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced his voice to stay steady. "She is my daughter," he said. "And if either of you lay a hand on her again, I swear you'll regret it." Brandon stepped forward, chest puffed, eyes burning, but Vanessa touched his arm, stopping him. "Go inside," she muttered. He didn't move. Now, after a tense beat, Brandon turned and slammed the door behind him. Vanessa looked back at Nathan, eyes tired, voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." Nathan's reply was instant, sharp, and final. "And I'm not leaving without her." The next morning, Nathan signed the lease for a modest, 2-bedroom house on the edge of Maple Hollow, tucked behind a weathered oak tree and a rusted mailbox that leaned slightly to the left. The paint was chipped, the fence needed repair, and the porch creaked with every step, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that it sat just 4 blocks from the elementary school and had a clear view of the playground from the back window. He paid in cash, no questions asked, and the landlord, A middle-aged man named Roy with tobacco-stained fingers and a soft spot for veterans handed over the keys without fanfare. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and old fabric softener. The floors groaned beneath his shoes. The walls were painted a faded cream, and the kitchen sink dripped with a steady rhythm. But there was quiet. For the first time in days, there was quiet that didn't feel like fear. Nathan set down his duffel bag on the kitchen table, the only furniture in the room, and walked through each space slowly, memorizing the creaks, testing the light switches, making mental notes of where Ellie's drawings could go, where a reading nook might fit, where she could finally feel safe. He stood in the second bedroom, the smaller one with a single window overlooking a maple tree, and tried to imagine it through her eyes. A real bed, clean sheets, a lamp she could turn on and off whenever she wanted, a door she could close not because she was hiding, but because she had privacy, autonomy, a room that was hers. He sat on the edge of the bare mattress the landlord had left behind and exhaled slowly, the weight of everything pressing into his spine. This wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was the first step toward it. He didn't know how long he'd be here. Didn't care. If it took weeks, months, even years to earn Ellie's trust again, he'd stay. He would wait outside that school every day if he had to. He would sit on this porch until she walked past and knew without a doubt that he wasn't going anywhere this time. No more signatures. No more silence. Just presence. Real and unshakable. This house wasn't perfect. But maybe, just maybe, it could become a place where Ellie learned how to breathe again. Nathan spent the afternoon walking the aisles of the only department store in Maple Hollow, moving like a man on a mission but pausing far too long at each shelf, second-guessing everything. He hadn't stepped into a children's section in years, hadn't dared. But now, standing beneath rows of glittery pillows and pastel blankets, he felt like a stranger in a world he should have belonged to long ago. He chose a small twin bed frame in soft white wood, the kind that could grow with a child but still felt warm, safe. He added a comforter with tiny princess crowns stitched along the border, and a matching pillow embroidered with the words, "Once upon a dream." It felt childish, but somehow right. He placed it gently in the cart, next to a stack of sketch pads, colored pencils, and a pack of watercolor paper thick enough not to tear under small, impatient hands. The cashier didn't ask questions. Back at the little house, Nathan assembled the bed slowly, careful with every screw and rail. The room still smelled like dust and quiet, but when the comforter was smoothed over and the pillow placed just so, the space began to shift. It didn't become hers, but it waited for her. On the small wooden desk beneath the window, he laid out the sketch pads, opened the pencil box like an invitation, and unwrapped a single chocolate bar, setting it gently beside a sticky note that simply read, "For you. No one will take it away." Then he closed the door. He didn't tell her. Didn't announce anything. Didn't send a message or make a call. This wasn't a gesture for show. It was a seed planted in silence, a space prepared with care and no expectations. He didn't know if she'd ever come, if she'd ever trust him enough to step inside, but he wanted her to know it was hers when she was ready. No conditions, no rules. Just a bed, a pillow, a desk filled with possibility, and a single bar of chocolate waiting to be claimed. He sat in the kitchen afterward, listening to the stillness, knowing he couldn't undo the years he'd missed, but he could wait now. And he would, quietly, unshakably, until she came. It began on a Tuesday afternoon. So quietly, Nathan almost missed it. There was a soft knock, 2 short taps at the back door, the one facing the maple tree. When he opened it, Rosa stood there, her eyes cautious but kind, one hand resting gently on the shoulder of a small figure half hidden behind her coat. Ellie didn't look up. Her hair was slightly damp from the drizzle, her shoes worn thin at the toes, her hands tucked tightly into her jacket sleeves. She said nothing, didn't step forward, just stared at the floor as if the boards might scold her for existing. Rosa offered no explanation. She didn't need to. Nathan simply stepped aside, his breath catching as Ellie passed him, her footsteps soundless on the old wood. He didn't reach for her, didn't say her name, just watched as she paused in the doorway of the room, the one with the princess pillow and unopened sketch pads, and hesitated. Rosa gave her the smallest nod. That was all it took. Ellie stepped inside. She didn't speak, didn't sit on the bed. Instead, she moved to the desk, the one he'd placed beneath the window, and picked up a pencil, not just any pencil, the stubby one, the same kind she always clutched at school. Nathan froze, heart in his throat as she sat, pulled the sketch pad closer, and began to draw. Her movements were slow, precise, like she was remembering how, like the paper itself needed her permission to come to life. She didn't look at him, didn't look at Rosa, just let the lines flow, soft curves, small figures, a window with light spilling through. Nathan stood in the hallway, gripping the edge of the wall as if it might steady him. Rosa met his gaze briefly, her eyes shining with something between grief and hope, then turned to leave, mouthing only 2 words, "Let her." And so he did. Each day after that, around the same time, Ellie returned, never with words, never for long, but always to the desk, always to the pencil, and always to the silence that asked nothing of her except to be exactly who she was. Nathan never pushed, never intruded. He stayed in the kitchen, just close enough to hear the whisper of paper, just far enough to give her space. And slowly, like a flower coaxed by light, Ellie began to unfold not with speech, but with sketches that spoke volumes. It came back to him in waves the day he signed the papers that erased his name from his daughter's life. The memory didn't come with rage or regret at first, only with the cold numbness of a man who had convinced himself he had no choice. Nathan had been 32, CEO of a rising tech empire, on the cover of business magazines, hailed as the face of innovation. Then the rumors started. First, a whisper in a boardroom. Then a headline. Carter's illegitimate child with former housekeeper investors panicked, stock dipped. Shareholders demanded answers. The board called an emergency meeting, and his mother, Margaret Carter, showed up uninvited, clutching her pearls like a lifeline, her voice sharper than any accusation. You think they'll let you keep your seat once they find out she's not fully white, a maid's child? Nathan. What kind of legacy is that she'd said the word maid like it tasted of mold? He remembered the heat behind his eyes, the urge to shout, to throw a chair, to quit. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded. Quietly, obediently, like he had as a boy. The board presented a path forward, an NDA, a financial settlement, full custody to Vanessa, and a relinquishment form that would legally cut all ties. Just sign it, his mother had whispered that night at his penthouse, sipping wine she didn't pay for. You'll thank me one day. Nathan stared at the document for what felt like hours. Ellie had been barely 2 weeks old. He hadn't held her once. Hadn't seen her since the hospital. Vanessa hadn't wanted him there. And maybe, deep down, he hadn't wanted to see her either. Not because of who she was, but because of what he wasn't ready to become. a father, a scandal, a man who broke his mother's perfectly curated image. He signed. He remembered the way the pen scratched the paper like it was carving the decision into his bones. Afterward, he walked out of that building and told himself it was mercy, that he'd only ruin her life if he stayed. That children forget. But now, watching Ellie sketch a world where he didn't yet belong, he knew that every word had been a lie. She hadn't forgotten, and neither had he. It took Nathan weeks to truly understand the silence, not just hear it, but feel its weight, its texture, the way it filled a room like smoke you couldn't escape. At first, he thought Ellie's quiet was just shyness, a child's natural caution around a stranger. Then he wondered if it was anger, a refusal to engage with the man who had once signed her away. But the more time passed, the more he observed, the more he saw it for what it really was: not rebellion, not stubbornness, but despair. The kind of silence that came from believing, with every fragile piece of your being, that your voice didn't matter. Ellie didn't sulk. She didn't pout or cross her arms in protest. She simply folded inward, as if disappearing a little more each day. She followed instructions at school, sat still when told, ate only when directly prompted, but she never volunteered, never reached, never asked. Nathan noticed how she startled at loud sounds, how she flinched slightly when someone called her name, how her eyes darted to the exits in crowded rooms like a child who had memorized escape routes. She never ran, never cried, just endured. Rosa had said it once in passing, her voice breaking as she wiped down the sink. She doesn't misbehave because she thinks love has to be earned. That single sentence haunted him. It clung to him as he watched Ellie sit for hours at the little desk in the room he had prepared, drawing story after story in silence, worlds with no people, only animals, trees, quiet landscapes where no one shouted, no one touched, no one left. It echoed in his ears when he overheard a teacher say Ellie hadn't spoken a word in months, that some kids just weren't expressive. But Nathan knew better now. He had begun to see the way Ellie tensed when Brandon's name was mentioned, the way her tiny shoulders rose with quiet dread when it was time to go home. She didn't trust words because words had betrayed her. Promises had been broken. Goodnight kisses had been conditional. And love, if it had ever existed in her home, had come with silence, control, and fear. Nathan realized he was not just trying to reconnect with a child. He was trying to reach someone who had built her entire world on the certainty that she did not matter. And to undo that would take more than love. It would take presence. Every day. Without asking anything in return. Nathan drove 2 hours out of Maple Hollow to a small brick law office tucked between a bakery and a hardware store in the sleepy town of Redfield. The gold letters on the door read, Marcus Reed, Family Law. Nathan had met Marcus once before years ago during a merger negotiation where Marcus had served as legal counsel for a stubborn but principled nonprofit. The man had been quiet, firm, and disarmingly honest, traits Nathan now found himself desperately needing. When he entered the office, Marcus looked up from a stack of papers and raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to see a tech CEO standing in his doorway like a nervous parent. No suits, no entourage, just Nathan Carter in a wrinkled shirt, holding a folder with shaking hands. After a brief silence, Marcus gestured to the seat. "Tell me everything," he said. Nathan didn't hold back. He spoke of Ellie, of the anonymous video that shattered his carefully buried denial, of her silence, her drawings, the way she seemed to fold into herself at every mention of home. He described Brandon's cold stare, Vanessa's guarded words, the way Rosa had quietly facilitated Ellie's visits. And finally, He placed the folder on the desk. It contained copies of the original relinquishment form, a notarized statement from Rosa, and a printed screenshot of the video's opening frame, Ellie on her knees, scrubbing a floor too harsh for a child's hands. Marcus listened intently, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, not interrupting once. When Nathan finished, the silence hung heavy. "It's not enough," Marcus finally said, his voice low but firm. "What you've given me is concern, even heartbreak. But in court, that won't get you guardianship, especially since you voluntarily relinquished your rights." Nathan swallowed hard. He had expected that, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a blow to the chest. "So what do I need?" he asked quietly. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You need proof of emotional harm. Psychological evaluations. A pattern of neglect or control. Rosa's statement helps, but she's just one voice. You'll need more. Teachers. Counselors. Anyone who can speak to Ellie's behavior over time, and ideally, we'd want some indication of Brandon's instability. Anything to suggest he poses a risk." Nathan nodded slowly. He hadn't come expecting a miracle, just a path. And Marcus, to his credit, didn't offer false hope, but he did offer strategy, and that was enough. For now, Nathan had one mission: build the case, not for himself, but for Ellie's right to be free. Otis Green had been the night security guard at Maple Crest Residences for over 12 years, long enough to see secrets in porch lights and stories unfold in the shadows. He didn't talk much, didn't interfere, just made his rounds with a flashlight, a thermos of coffee, and eyes that missed nothing. But when Nathan Carter approached him one evening, calm but visibly tense, asking about a little girl named Ellie living in Unit 2C, Otis's expression changed. He looked away, exhaled through his nose, and said quietly, "You heard Daddy." Nathan didn't answer right away, just met the man's gaze with something close to grief. Otis nodded slowly, as if that was all the confirmation he needed. Then he spoke, not with drama, not with exaggeration, but with the steady, precise recall of someone who had memorized suffering he didn't know how to fix. "Couple nights a week," Otis began. "She's out there. The back steps. No jacket. Just sittin'. Sometimes curled up under that plastic chair like she trying to disappear. I tried to ask once, she didn't say nothin'. Just stared at the ground like I wasn't there." He paused, then continued, his voice quieter now. "One night it was rainin' hard. Cold. Real cold. I found her out by the laundry room door, soaked through. Shiverin'. She had bruises on her wrist, like somebody'd grabbed her too hard. I offered her my coat. She flinched. Wouldn't let me touch her. Just kept whisperin' she'd be good. She'd be quiet." Nathan felt something crack in his chest. Otis saw it. She ain't loud. That one. Never causes no trouble. Always clean. Hair brushed. Shoes tied. But that ain't the same as being okay. Kids that age shouldn't be that quiet. Mister. Shouldn't be afraid of knocking on their own door. He rubbed a hand over his face, weathered and worn. I filed a report with management. They didn't do nothing. Said it wasn't their business. I ain't got kids, but I know what scared looks like. That girl, she's scared all the time. Nathan asked if anyone else had seen it. Otis shrugged. Maybe. But no one talks. Not around here. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled receipt with a date and time scrawled on the back. That's the night I saw her crying under the porch light. You want the truth. You'll need more than stories. but maybe this helps. It did. More than he could say. It was just after dusk when Rosa Delgado knocked on the side door of Nathan's rented cottage, her worn jacket pulled tight against the early autumn chill. She didn't speak at first, just looked at him with the weary determination of someone who had seen too much and kept quiet for too long. In her hand was a small flash drive, no bigger than a key, wrapped in a torn piece of paper towel like it was something fragile, sacred, or dangerous. Nathan opened the door wider, letting her in. She didn't sit, didn't even remove her coat. Instead, she held the drive out, her eyes shining with something between guilt and urgency. "I wasn't going to keep it," she said softly. "I recorded it by accident. I was cleaning near the baby monitor one night. The bedroom one, it's not much, but..." Her voice trailed off. Nathan took the drive with shaking fingers, his throat tightening. He didn't ask questions, just moved to his laptop, inserted the drive, and hit play. The recording was scratchy, filled with low ambient noise, the faint hum of a heater, the creak of a bed frame. And then, like a whisper from beneath a blanket, a small voice, cracked and barely audible. "I don't want to go up there. If he's still awake." Pause. Then again, softer. "I'll stay right here. I'll be good. Just don't make me go if Uncle Brandon's not asleep." Nathan froze. His body went cold. The voice was unmistakable, Ellie. That fragile thread of breath, the way she curled her vowels tight, as if every word might get her in trouble. Rosa stood silently behind him, eyes fixed on the screen. She was talking to herself, she said at last. "Didn't know anyone was listening, I think. She hides when he's angry. I've seen her do it. Pretend to nap on the rug or crawl behind the couch. But this was fear. Nathan. Nathan didn't reply. He couldn't. The sound of his daughter's voice afraid. Negotiating with shadows ripped through every ounce of restraint he had. He knew the law needed proof, hard evidence. And now, with this recording, he had something no court could ignore. Ellie's own words, quiet, broken, but real. A child too afraid to climb into her own bed. A child who had once been his, and who still was, in every way that mattered. Nathan didn't cry easily. In fact, he couldn't remember the last time he had allowed himself to. Not when his father died. Not when the board had tried to force him out of his own company. Not even the day he signed the relinquishment papers for Ellie, though his chest had felt like it was being hollowed out with a dull blade. But now, sitting alone in the dim light of the cottage's kitchen with Rosa gone and the audio file still echoing in his head, he broke. The tears came suddenly, without sound at first, just a slow, involuntary shaking in his shoulders, as if his body were remembering something he had spent years forcing it to forget. The sound of Ellie's voice, that whisper-soaked plea to be left alone if Brandon was still awake, had torn through the final layer of emotional armor he had spent a lifetime building. He clutched the flash drive in one hand, his knuckles white, as if squeezing it would somehow protect her, protect the little girl he had never truly known, never held when she was scared, never told she was safe. He buried his face in his hands, and the sobs came like a storm deep, guttural, years too late. It wasn't just guilt. It was shame. Shame for the silence he had chosen, for the convenience of walking away, for the cowardice masked as logic, for letting his mother's voice override his own. "She's not right for our legacy," his mother had said, all those years ago. "You know how the press will twist this. A child born out of recklessness. From someone like her, she's not one of us." and like a fool, he had listened. He thought he was protecting Ellie by staying out of her life, that she'd be better off without him. But now he saw what absence really looked like. It looked like a 5-year-old girl whispering to the dark, too afraid to sleep in her own bed. It looked like bruises and silence and a pencil clenched so tightly her fingers shook. He cried for the years he couldn't get back, for the nights she had waited for someone who never came, and for the unbearable truth that love, when withheld, could hurt just as much as violence. And as the tears fell, one certainty cut through the grief like lightning through night. He would not leave her again. Not now. Not ever. Nathan stood outside the worn-down duplex on Birch Street, his fists clenched at his sides, his heartbeat a steady drumbeat of controlled fury beneath his ribcage. The house looked tired, paint peeling from the shutters, a loose gutter swinging slightly in the wind, children's toys half buried in the overgrown grass like forgotten artifacts. He hadn't come here to yell. He hadn't come to threaten. He'd rehearsed that part over and over on the drive. Stay calm. Stay focused. Don't let rage make you reckless. But even as he knocked on the weathered door, his jaw was already tight, his breath sharp. Brandon opened it after a long pause, beer in hand, shirt half-buttoned, eyes bloodshot and dismissive. "What the hell do you want?" he muttered, leaning against the frame like Nathan's presence was more inconvenience than alarm. Nathan's voice was even. Too even. "We need to talk." About Ellie. The name alone made Brandon's expression flicker just for a second before he scoffed and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "She's fine," Brandon snapped. "She eats, sleeps, goes to school. What more do you want?" Nathan's stare didn't flinch. "I want her safe. I want her unafraid. And I want you to understand I'm not going away," Brandon chuckled bitterly. "You mean now that you've got a guilty conscience, you think you can show up and play hero Nathan didn't rise to it? I'm not here to play anything. I know what's been happening in that house." The silence between them cracked wide. Brandon's hand twitched, the bottleneck creaking under his grip. "You think you can prove something? Tech boy," he sneered. "Go ahead. Try." Nathan stepped closer, just enough for the threat to be clear but not loud. "I already have." And then he walked away. Not because he was done, but because this was only the beginning. Brandon's voice followed Nathan like a rusted hook, laced with derision and something darker. "You think a pink bed's gonna fix her?" He called out, laughing, the sound dry and sharp like splintered wood. "You really think a couple of glittery pillows and some crayons are gonna undo 5 years of silence?" Nathan paused, spine rigid, but didn't turn around just yet. Brandon pushed forward, emboldened by the fact that Nathan hadn't swung at him. "I've seen your type," he continued, stepping down the porch stairs, voice rising with every word. "Big money, big guilt. Think you can swoop in with a damn fairy tale and a princess bed and make her forget who really raised her?" Nathan slowly turned, his eyes cold now, still calm, but laced with something immovable. Brandon didn't stop. "She don't talk because she knows." He spat. "Knows people like you only show up when the cameras roll. You think she's drawing because of you? Hell no. That kid knows how to keep quiet. It's survival." Nathan finally stepped forward, the air between them tightening. "Don't mistake kindness for weakness," he said quietly, each word deliberate. "And don't assume silence is the same as safety." Brandon scoffed, but his smirk faltered. "She's just a weird little girl, man. Always has been. Always drawing. Always hiding. That's not my fault." Nathan stared at him, eyes narrowed. No. But what she's afraid of at night is... Brandon's jaw twitched. For the first time, he didn't have a retort ready. Nathan didn't need to stay longer. He'd said what mattered. As he walked back to his car, Brandon's words still echoed, but this time, they meant nothing. Because Nathan understood what Brandon never would. Ellie didn't need fixing. She needed freedom. And someone who stayed. Vanessa sat on the edge of the worn floral couch, hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale, a tremor running through her fingers she couldn't control. She didn't look up when Nathan entered the living room again after his confrontation with Brandon. Her eyes were fixed on the coffee table, where a chipped porcelain mug sat untouched beside a crumpled tissue. Her shoulders rose and fell in shallow breaths, like she was trying not to exist too loudly. Nathan stood across from her, silent for a long moment, unsure whether anger or pity was louder inside him. "You saw what's happening," he said finally, his voice quieter than he expected, but edged with tension. Vanessa's lips parted, as if to speak, but nothing came. She closed them again, a flicker of shame flashing across her face. She still wouldn't meet his gaze. "You let him hurt her," Nathan said, more a statement than an accusation. Still, she flinched, her eyes closed. Her arms pulled tighter around herself, like maybe she could fold her body small enough to disappear. "I didn't know it was that bad," she whispered, barely audible. I didn't think he'd..." Her voice broke, and she shook her head, as if trying to erase what she had just admitted. Nathan knelt slowly in front of her, bringing his face to her level, but not touching her. "Vanessa," he said, "gentler now. She's afraid to go to sleep. She thinks her safety depends on whether he's awake or not. That's not discipline. That's fear. That's trauma." Her lower lip trembled, but she still didn't respond. He waited. She didn't move, didn't fight, but didn't speak. The silence was deafening. Not defiant, just hollow. A woman trapped too long in a cycle she'd convinced herself was survivable. And Nathan realized then Vanessa wasn't his enemy. But she also wasn't his ally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She was another ghost in that house breathing, but not alive. Nathan stood in the doorway. The faint creak of the old wooden floor beneath his shoes, the only sound in the heavy silence that had settled over the room like dust. Vanessa remained on the couch, still clutching herself, still not looking at him, as if the weight of her choices and of the years between them had rooted her in place. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a thin sliver of late afternoon light that cut across the floor and stopped at Nathan's feet. He looked at her one last time, not with judgment, but with the full gravity of what he now knew. The bruises, the silences, the fear etched into Ellie's every movement. He couldn't unsee it, couldn't unknow it, and he wouldn't walk away from it again. His voice was quiet, steady, but absolute. "I'm not leaving again," he said. "Not this time. Not ever." The words didn't echo, but they didn't need to. They landed like truth on the cracked linoleum and settled into the air between them. Vanessa's shoulders trembled slightly, as though the declaration itself had broken through whatever numb shell she'd been hiding inside. But she still didn't speak. She didn't argue, didn't beg him to leave or ask him to stay. She just sat there, silent, watching the floor, her breath unsteady. Nathan didn't wait for permission. He didn't need it. He had already missed 5 years, already abandoned a daughter who'd learned to live without softness, without comfort, without the knowledge that someone would come for her. That mistake would not be repeated. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about presence, about showing up, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it hurt, especially then. He turned and walked out without slamming the door, without another glance back. But his words remained behind, echoing in the silence he left. I will not leave again, not one more time. It was nearly midnight when the knock came, 3 soft, uncertain taps against the wood that barely rose above the sound of rain whispering against the roof. Nathan sat at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. Documents from Marcus Reed scattered across the table, guardianship forms, witness affidavits, custody templates. He hadn't expected anyone, not this late. But when he opened the door, there she was, Vanessa, soaked to the bone in a faded gray hoodie and jeans that clung to her legs from the rain. Her hair, usually carefully pulled back, now hung in wet strands around her pale face, and her lips trembled from more than just the cold. For a second, neither of them spoke. The porch light cast her in a pale yellow glow, and Nathan noticed she was holding something against her chest, Ellie's sketchbook, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag like it was the most fragile thing in the world. She didn't offer it. Not yet. She just stood there, small and hollowed out, like someone finally realizing the storm outside wasn't nearly as terrifying as the one she had let grow inside her home. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice barely a whisper, not demanding anything, just asking, like she wasn't sure she deserved even that. Nathan stepped aside without a word, motioning her into the warmth of the house. She moved like she hadn't slept in days, like the weight of denial and fear had finally begun to crush her from within. When she sat at the kitchen table across from him, she placed the wrapped sketchbook down gently, like it might break. "You were right," she said quietly, eyes fixed on her hands, about everything, about him. The words didn't bring Nathan any satisfaction. They only deepened the ache he already carried. Vanessa looked up, finally, tears mixing with raindrops still clinging to her cheeks. "I don't know if I can fix what I've done," she said, voice shaking, "but I want her safe, even if it means letting go." Vanessa reached into the pocket of her damp hoodie with trembling fingers and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. She held it in her palm for a moment, as if unsure whether to let it go, as if the weight of what it contained might burn her skin. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible over the ticking of the kitchen clock. "It's all on here," she said, placing it gently on the table between them. Nathan looked at it without touching it, waiting for her to explain. "He didn't know my phone was recording," she continued, her eyes fixed on the table's grain. "He was in the garage, talking to that friend of his, the one with the rusted pickup. Said he could cross the border without raising red flags. Said it'd be easy with a kid. Less suspicion." Her voice cracked, but she kept going, forcing the words out like splinters. "He was planning to take her. Nathan. Ellie. Disappear. Said nobody would care if she was gone. Said he'd start over in Mexico. Maybe change her name. Make her less difficult." Nathan's breath caught. The quiet fury that had been building inside him now turned cold and sharp. Vanessa swallowed hard, tears brimming in her eyes but refusing to fall. "I knew if I didn't do something now, I'd lose her forever, and it'd be my fault. Again." She finally looked at him, pleading not for forgiveness, but for action. "I don't know how to undo everything, but that," she pointed to the USB, "that's proof. Real proof. Enough to stop him. Enough to keep her safe." Nathan slowly reached for the drive, turning it over in his hand. It was light, too light for the weight it carried: a child's safety, a mother's guilt, a father's final chance. He nodded once, his voice steady. "We'll stop him." Vanessa sat in silence for a long moment, her eyes distant, lost somewhere between the ticking clock on the wall and the weight of years she could no longer deny. The rain outside had softened into a steady hush, like the town itself was holding its breath. Finally, she spoke, not loudly, not with dramatics, but with the quiet devastation of someone who had just seen herself clearly for the first time. For years, she began, voice low and raw. "I hated you." She didn't look at Nathan as she said it. Her gaze was fixed on her hands, twisting nervously in her lap. "I told myself you were a coward, that you'd signed those papers and walked away without a second thought, that you didn't care, that you couldn't have cared. It was the only way I could live with what I'd done staying with him, making excuses, pretending it was all okay." Nathan said nothing. He let the words come, knowing she hadn't come here for comfort. "But I see it now," she continued, finally lifting her eyes to meet his. They were rimmed red, filled with guilt but also something else: clarity. "You didn't leave her. You were pushed out, and I let them push you." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "And now I'm the one disappearing. I thought I was protecting her by staying quiet, by keeping the peace, by surviving. But all this time, I was the one who vanished. I was right there, but I didn't see her." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she didn't bother to wipe it away. "You came back. You're here. You're fighting. And I've been hiding behind fear, behind lies, behind him." She exhaled shakily. "I used to think you were the one who abandoned her, but I was wrong. The one walking away from her is me." Nathan looked at her, heart heavy. There was no triumph in her confession, only truth, finally spoken. And that truth, painful as it was, cracked something open in both of them. Nathan didn't speak. He simply reached forward and wrapped his hand around the USB like it was a lifeline, his fingers closing tightly over the small, silver device that now held the weight of justice. His knuckles turned white. For a brief second, he locked eyes with Vanessa. No words passed between them. But the message was clear. This was the line in the sand. This time, he wouldn't be shut out. He wouldn't be silenced. Without hesitation, he stood up, crossed the room, and grabbed his phone from the counter. His heart thudded in his chest as he scrolled to Marcus Reed's name and hit call. It was late, but he didn't care. Some things couldn't wait until morning. "Nathan," came Marcus's groggy voice on the third ring. "It's urgent," Nathan said. His voice clipped, focused, all the warmth gone, replaced by the steel of a father finally ready to fight with everything he had. "I've got something. A recording. Proof Brandon was planning to flee the country with Ellie. Vanessa recorded him. It's all on a USB, and I need you to get a restraining order filed tonight. Emergency protection, full custody motion, whatever it takes. I'm not giving him another hour to get near her." The sound of rustling papers echoed through the phone as Marcus woke up fast. "You're sure it's clear evidence?" Nathan looked at the drive in his palm, feeling its tiny weight press like lead against his skin. He said her name, said he'd take her across the border. "It's all there. We're done playing nice." Marcus was already typing, voice sharp. "I'll prep the emergency filings. Can you bring the drive in now? On my way." Nathan ended the call and turned to Vanessa. She didn't ask to come with him. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, they were on the same side. And for the first time in Ellie's life, someone was finally moving fast enough to protect her. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with tension just beneath the surface, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what might unfold. It was an emergency custody hearing, rushed onto the docket by Marcus with barely enough time to notify all parties. Nathan sat at one side of the room, jaw tight, eyes constantly darting toward the small figure seated beside a court-appointed child advocate, Ellie, his daughter, his silent, haunted child. She wore a navy dress that looked too formal for her feet not quite touching the floor as she sat stiffly, holding nothing but a piece of paper and a stubby pencil gripped tightly in her right hand. The judge, a stern but tired-looking woman in her late 50s, scanned the file in front of her as attorneys made quiet preparations. Ellie hadn't spoken a word since entering the courthouse. The child psychologist had already noted that verbal communication was selective or withdrawn, and though Marcus had built a strong case with the audio recording and Otis's testimony, there was still the unspoken question lingering in the air: what did Ellie want? No one pressured her to speak. No one asked her to take the stand. But as the judge paused before issuing a decision, Ellie slid the drawing forward on the table like a whispered truth. The advocate picked it up gently and handed it to the judge. It was a simple image but loaded with meaning. A child-sized room with 2 doors. One door had a giant lock, drawn in thick black pencil strokes, while the other stood wide open, colored faintly in yellow light. The girl in the center stood between them, holding nothing, just standing, looking at the open door. The judge's hand trembled slightly as she laid the paper down. "Let the record reflect," she said, her voice softening. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words ever could. Marcus Reed rose from his seat with a quiet, practiced authority that carried through the courtroom without needing volume. He adjusted his glasses, stepped toward the judge's bench, and began laying out the evidence with the clarity of someone who knew time was a luxury this child couldn't afford. "Your Honor," he began, "we're not here with assumptions, we're here with facts." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a series of documents, placing them neatly before him. Exhibit A is a signed affidavit from Rosa Delgado, the domestic worker who first raised the alarm. She has worked in the Hale household for over 4 years and has consistently witnessed the child, Ellie Carter, being treated more like a servant than a daughter. She submitted photographic evidence of bruises, audio recordings of the child expressing fear, and most critically, a covert video showing the girl silently scrubbing floors late at night while adults remained indifferent or absent. He paused to let that image settle into the courtroom. Then he continued. Exhibit B testimony from Otis Green, head of security at the housing complex where the child resides. Mr. Green, a military veteran with no prior personal involvement in this matter, witnessed the child being left outside in the rain for extended periods, visibly bruised and trembling, without explanation or parental concern. And finally, Exhibit C. He held up a small USB drive in a sealed evidence bag. This contains a clear recording of Brandon Hale, the child's stepfather, discussing plans to flee to Mexico with Ellie, without consent, warning, or legal grounds. His intent was not protection, it was escape. This is not a family dispute, Your Honor. This is a matter of a child's immediate safety, dignity, and psychological well-being. And this court, right now, has the power to choose the open door in her drawing. His voice never rose, but the truth in it rang loud and clear. The courtroom held its breath as the judge leaned forward, fingers laced, eyes steady on the small girl who still hadn't spoken a word. She glanced once more at the drawing Ellie had submitted. 2 doors, one locked in heavy black, one open and glowing softly. Then she turned to Nathan, to Marcus, to the lawyers and guardians, but mostly, her attention stayed on Ellie, who sat still as a stone, her tiny hand now resting flat on the table, the pencil lying motionless beside it. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented," the judge began, her voice calm but resolute, with the weight of someone used to making impossible decisions. "There are no fresh bruises on this child, no hospital records, no police reports filed by neighbors, and no broken bones. But what we do see, what we cannot ignore, are scars." She tapped the file gently, then gestured toward the child's artwork. "Scars don't always show on skin. Some are quiet. Some are invisible. Some are made in rooms with closed doors and long nights of silence. And those scars, those deep ones, they speak too, just not in ways our usual system is trained to hear." Her eyes returned to Ellie. "But this court is listening." A pause hung in the air, solemn and tender. "We believe the silence. We believe the child." Her gavel came down with a soft but decisive knock. "Temporary custody is hereby granted to Mr. Nathan Carter, effective immediately, pending full psychological evaluation and further hearings. Visitation with the mother is suspended until further notice. Mr. Brandon Hale is to have no contact." She stood, nodding once to Marcus, once to Ellie. "This court chooses the open door." And with that, the silence in the courtroom shifted from fear to a kind of fragile hope. Nathan Carter stepped out of the courthouse with the official documents pressed tightly against his chest, his fingers gripping them like a lifeline. The sky above Maple Hollow was gray, heavy with the kind of low clouds that seemed to absorb sound, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Behind him, the doors closed with a muffled thud that felt strangely final, like a chapter had ended, even though he knew the battle was only beginning. The court had ruled in his favor. For now, temporary guardianship of Ellie Carter was officially his. She would no longer sleep behind locked doors in silence, no longer be watched by a man who viewed her not as a child, but as an inconvenience. Brandon Hale, by court order, was prohibited from all contact, physical, verbal, digital, or otherwise. The restraining order was clear and immediate. One violation, and it would become criminal. Nathan read those lines over and over as if memorizing each syllable could ensure Ellie's safety. He had never imagined that legal custody could feel so fragile, so desperately earned. Marcus Reed walked beside him in silence, nodding once as if to say, "We did it. Now don't let go." Nathan didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. Behind him, Ellie walked in slow steps, her small fingers curled tightly around the strap of her backpack. She still hadn't said a word, but when Nathan glanced back at her, she was looking straight at him, not through him, not past him, but at him. And that look, that silent acknowledgement, hit him harder than any verdict. It meant she was watching, waiting, testing if the promise he made, "I won't leave again," was real. And for the first time, Nathan felt like he could answer her without words. He reached back his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The war wasn't over, but the door had opened. The moment Ellie stepped into Nathan's small rented house on the edge of Maple Hollow, the world seemed to pause. No dramatic reaction, no tears or protests, no words at all, just a girl standing at the threshold, staring quietly into a space built entirely for her, yet unknown. Nathan held the door open, watching her with a kind of reverence that bordered on fear. Would she step in? Would she freeze? Would she run? But Ellie did none of those. She simply walked forward, Past him, past the couch and the warm light of the standing lamp, past the untouched bowl of strawberries he'd placed on the kitchen counter like a silent welcome. Her steps were light, measured, almost cautious, but not afraid. She walked down the short hallway, turned right without needing to be shown, and entered the bedroom he had prepared weeks earlier, when she was still only a ghost on a screen, a desperate hope. The pink comforter was still tucked in perfectly, the princess pillow untouched, the small bookshelf holding crayons, sketch pads, and a battered copy of Goodnight Moon. Nathan didn't follow her in. He stood outside the doorframe, watching as she took in the room with a long, slow glance. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But she did something far more important. She placed her backpack in the corner, kicked off her shoes, and sat cross-legged on the edge of the bed. No questions, no commands, just a quiet acceptance. For Nathan, it was enough, more than enough, because in that one silent act, Ellie had told him something words never could. I'm not ready to trust you yet, but I'm willing to stay, and that was everything. He exhaled slowly, leaned against the wall, and whispered to himself, she came home. It wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. But it was the first breath of something new. A fragile beginning that didn't need permission, only patience. That night, the soft pink glow from Ellie's bedroom spilled out into the hallway like a heartbeat. The lamp on her nightstand stayed on long past midnight, casting gentle light across the drawings she hadn't touched yet, and the stuffed animals arranged in careful stillness. Nathan didn't turn it off. He didn't knock or check in. Instead, he sat just outside her door, his back against the wall, knees bent, hands folded loosely in front of him. There was no sound from inside, no crying, no movement, not even the soft rustle of blankets, but the light told him she was awake. Maybe she couldn't sleep. Maybe she didn't feel safe enough yet. Or maybe the silence she carried was heavier at night, when the world stopped pretending. Nathan sat with it. He didn't scroll his phone, didn't answer emails, didn't check headlines or stock updates. The CEO was gone. The father stayed, minute by minute, hour by hour. He kept his post in the dim hallway, the quiet anchor just outside the room where his daughter, his silent, brilliant, broken daughter, was learning how to be home again. At one point, he thought he heard a soft thump, like a foot shifting against the mattress or a pillow falling to the floor, and he almost stood. But then it passed, and the light remained steady. He stayed seated. His eyes burned from exhaustion, but he didn't let himself drift off. He wanted to be awake not in case she needed him, but because she might. That mattered more than anything. In a world that had failed her again and again, he would not be one more shadow that disappeared in the dark. He would stay. When the hallway clock blinked 2:43 a.m., he noticed the light inside flicker once, then twice before it dimmed completely. Ellie had turned off the lamp. Not because she was told, not because she had to, but because she felt it however faintly that someone was near. Nathan rested his head gently against the wall, eyes wide open, tears quietly building. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the first real night, and he was there for every second of it. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the lace curtains Nathan had chosen on a whim, casting delicate shadows across the wooden floor. He was in the kitchen, quietly making scrambled eggs he wasn't sure Ellie would eat, when he heard the smallest footsteps behind him. He turned slowly, heart in his throat, not wanting to startle her. Ellie stood there in her mismatched socks, her hair still tousled from sleep, fingers gripping the hem of her oversized pajama shirt like it was a life vest. Her eyes, though still shadowed by caution, held something new that hadn't been there before. Not trust. Not yet. But a question wrapped in hope. "Can I stay in the bed? All night?" she asked, her voice barely more than breath. It didn't sound defiant. It didn't sound like a demand. It sounded like she was seeking permission to feel safe, to believe that maybe this room, this house, this man, her father, might not vanish when night came. Nathan froze, spatula midair, trying not to show the tidal wave breaking inside him. He wanted to run to her, scoop her up, promise the world, but he didn't. Instead, he set the spatula down slowly, crouched so his eyes were level with hers, and said gently, "Yes, sweetheart. The bed is yours, as long as you want. Every night. Always." Ellie blinked once, then nodded, as if locking that permission into some guarded part of her memory. She didn't smile. She didn't move forward. But she turned, quietly, and walked back down the hall to her room. Nathan stayed crouched on the floor for several seconds after she disappeared, his breath catching in his chest. He understood now that healing wouldn't be a dramatic outburst or sudden breakthrough. It would come in whispers, in cautious questions like this one, in permission sought and quietly received. He rose slowly, returned to the eggs, and for the first time in years, felt the smallest flicker of peace in the pan's soft sizzle. 1 year later, the house felt different in ways that could never be measured by furniture or paint. It breathed, it listened, and most of all it waited, patiently, for Ellie to come alive in her own time. And she had. Slowly, gently, like a sunrise that never rushed the sky. Ellie now spoke in full sentences, often softly and only when she had something worth saying, but her words no longer trembled with fear. They landed with quiet certainty. She still preferred drawing over conversation, silence over noise, and shadows over spotlights, but her eyes no longer carried the haunted dimness they once held. They shone now, especially when she saw her father reading the same dog-eared book for the 5th time just because it made her laugh, or when he let her stir the pancake batter even though it made a mess. At school. She didn't raise her hand, but she no longer flinched when called upon. At home. She left her door open most nights, a gesture Nathan understood to mean, "I trust you now." The princess pillow was worn soft with use. The pink bed frame had been repainted twice due to crayon murals, and the chocolate stash in the bottom drawer was frequently raided. Her voice, though still rare, had become sacred. Each word she offered felt like a gift. One evening, when Nathan was working late in the kitchen, Ellie patted in with a half-finished drawing and said, with the smallest grin, "I think this one's for the wall." He turned, stunned by how easily she'd spoken, and nodded as if his heart wasn't swelling in his chest. And in that moment, he knew she hadn't just found her voice, she'd finally begun to believe she deserved to be heard. It was late afternoon when Vanessa arrived, the sky gray and still, as if it too was holding its breath. She stood at the edge of the porch with a hesitant posture, clutching a small object wrapped in a worn cloth. Nathan opened the door, surprised to see her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She didn't ask to come in, and he didn't offer. Instead, she simply extended her hand and revealed what she had brought: a sketchbook, frayed at the edges, its corners bent and pages curled slightly from time and use. "It's hers," Vanessa said quietly, almost ashamed. She used to hide it under her pillow. "I found it when I was packing." Her voice broke slightly on the last word, but she steadied herself. "I thought she might want it back." Nathan took the book gently, nodding once. There were no accusations in his eyes, no smugness, only a quiet understanding that this small gesture came from a place she could barely articulate. Ellie wasn't home at the time she was at art class, but when she returned and saw the sketchbook lying on her desk, she stopped mid-step. Her fingers brushed the cover with the gentleness of someone revisiting an old part of themselves. She opened to the first page a clumsy drawing of a tree with a tiny figure beneath it, and a quiet smile passed over her face. She didn't ask who had brought it. She didn't need to. That night, Nathan saw her trace over one of the drawings in the book. Not to fix it, but to remember it. Whatever Vanessa had failed to give in protection, she had perhaps too late tried to return in memory. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. And sometimes, something was enough to start again. It started with a single room. Soft light, thick curtains, a low bookshelf, and walls painted in gentle hues that didn't overwhelm the senses. No fluorescent lights, no ticking clocks, just quiet, intentional, healing quiet. Nathan called it the Quiet House Project. But it was never about the building. It was about creating a space where children like Ellie, children who had been silenced by fear, shame, or trauma, could find their way back to voice, not through force, but through presence. The idea came to him not as a business plan, but as a promise that no child should ever feel punished for their silence. With help from Rosa, Marcus, and even Otis. The first center opened just outside Maple Hollow, in a renovated farmhouse surrounded by trees. Each room had tactile comforts, weighted blankets, sketch pads, headphones, a pet rabbit named Jupiter, and corners where no one asked questions. Therapists were trained not to speak first, but to wait, observe, respond with gentleness. Some children came in and never made eye contact. Others cried at the sound of a door creaking. One little boy sat by the window for 4 days before uttering a word. But when he finally did, it was safe. Nathan didn't speak often at the center, but he was always there kneeling to fix a wobbly chair, handing out fresh pencils, cleaning up spilled paint without comment. He wore no suits, gave no speeches. He simply stayed. And Ellie. She visited once a week, not as a patient but as a quiet mentor. She'd sit beside a new child and draw, not looking at them, not rushing them, just letting them see what healing might look like in strokes of color. The Quiet House Project didn't promise to fix broken things. It promised to sit with them, gently, until they were ready to mend. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sky seemed to hang low and everything outside whispered in soft gray tones. Nathan had just finished wiping down the kitchen counter when he heard Ellie's light footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting one of her usual quiet nods or maybe a request for more drawing paper. But instead, she was holding something close to her chest, a folded piece of heavy sketch paper. Her eyes met his, steady and bright. And without saying a word, she extended it toward him. He took it gently, hands almost trembling, and unfolded the paper. It was a drawing done in her familiar delicate lines and warm pastels. There were 3 figures: a tall man with gentle eyes, a small girl curled up beneath a pink blanket, and between them, a soft bed with stars and a heart drawn above it. The title, in careful lettering at the bottom, read Dad, Me, and the pink bed. Nathan couldn't speak. His throat tightened as he stared at the image. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a memory, a symbol, a confirmation that the long, uncertain road they had walked together had led somewhere solid. Ellie tugged lightly at his sleeve and said, just above a whisper, I didn't know how to say it. So I drew it instead. Nathan knelt down slowly, pulling her into his arms without a word, holding her tightly, protectively, like he should have from the beginning. And as the rain tapped gently against the windows and the quiet filled the room like a blessing, he realized that sometimes the most powerful words in the world aren't spoken at all. They're drawn, lived, and finally believed. In real life, children like Ellie exist all around us, quiet, withdrawn, seemingly obedient, but carrying silent wounds no one bothers to ask about. The world often praises compliance and overlooks stillness, mistaking it for strength, when sometimes it's actually despair in disguise. Ellie's journey teaches us a powerful truth: not every child who stays silent is okay. Some are just surviving. And in a world that moves too fast, we must learn to slow down, to observe, to listen not just with our ears, but with our hearts. If you're a parent, teacher, neighbor, or friend, remember your presence consistent, patient, and non-judgmental might be the one thing that helps a child believe they are safe enough to speak, or draw, or dream again. Nathan's redemption didn't come through grand speeches or wealth. It came when he sat quietly outside a door, night after night, proving with stillness that he would never leave again. And sometimes, that's all it takes: staying. Don't underestimate the healing power of simply showing up, over and over, until the silent ones know they're not alone. So here's a gentle challenge for you today. Pay attention to the quiet ones, the kids who never complain, the friend who always says, "I'm fine." Ask once more. Stay a little longer. Leave space for them to feel safe. Because sometimes, the loudest cries for help are made without a sound. If this story moved you, drop a comment below, share your thoughts, your story, or someone you've quietly stood by. Save this video so you don't forget, and follow our channel for more real, soul-deep stories like Ellie's. Your presence here matters. Let's build a world where silence is no longer mistaken for safety.